we go. Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it 30 seconds to make sure that everyone can get signed in to the webinar. We're happy you're here with us today. And as we give everybody a chance to get in before we start the session, um, if you have questions, just make sure you start thinking about them because you'll be able to drop them in. I'll talk about that in a minute. And also, we're excited because we know we had to reschedule this, so we're really happy that you made it today. Okay, I think we can start. Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today on April 16th, 2026 for our webinar, Why Your Hiring Isn't Working and What to Do About It. If hiring feels harder than it should right now, you're not alone. Today, we're going to break it down on why that's happening and what you can do about it. We're also diving into the real challenges that companies are facing and how your hiring process may be costing you really great candidates. My name is Denise Keddy, and I'm your moderator for today. And I will just jump in and give you a couple of housekeeping notes like we usually do. Our webinar will probably run about 45 minutes to an hour, and it will have time for Q&A. If you need to leave early or you want to share this webinar with your team, the recording will be available within 24 hours on the Ethos YouTube channel. If you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to drop them in to the chat area at any time. If you'd like your question directed to a specific presenter, just note that when you submit it so that when I read the questions, I can make sure I direct it to the right person. If you run into any technical issues, same thing, just drop a note in the chat area because I'll be monitoring that in the background. And a quick reminder before we get into the slide handouts, today's session is being recorded and all materials shared are proprietary to Ethos and protected by copyright. This content is intended for attendees only, so please don't record or distribute it without permission. And our session today is designed to give you some practical advice, but not legal advice. So if there's any legal or specific situation that requires legal, please connect with your legal counsel. And now, to download the slides today, you can download using the link that's on the screen, and I will also keep dropping that in the chat in case you arrived a little bit later. We can go to the next slide. All right. For those people who are looking for HRCI credit, this program was approved for 1 hour of credit. Be sure to complete the post-session survey, the link is there, to receive your certificate of completion. I will also drop that in the chat during the session, so you don't have to worry about getting it if you don't get it right now. So let me introduce you to the presenters we have for us today. First, we have Linda Duffy, President and founder of Ethos Human Capital Solutions. Linda brings over 30 years of human capital experience, and Linda and her team are known for delivering high-impact consulting, recruiting, training, payroll support, and organizational development programs. Linda and her team are known for building the magic of human connections within organizations and helping business leaders get the right systems, people, and culture in place so that they can focus on running their business. And we're going to let you in on a little secret. This is Linda's favorite time of year. Why? Because the Ducks have made it into the Stanley Cup playoffs, and it's still early enough in the baseball season that the Angels still may have a chance. So she still has hope. So we're getting her on a good day. Our next presenter is Melissa Araya, and she is with Ethos Human Capital Solutions, and she's our rock star recruiting manager. She joined the team in 2022 and brings over 14 years of recruiting experience. She specializes in building scalable systems-driven hiring processes that work for companies to bring structure and consistency to your hiring so that when you make your decisions, your hiring decisions, you're much more confident in what you're doing. She's also the mom of a beautiful baby boy, and in her spare time, she loves to go camping and snorkeling, but she just told us that she doesn't love sharks. So we know that there's a story there, and I'm going to have to find out about it later. Melissa, can you kick us off today?
Thank you so much, Denise. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We are going to walk through diagnosing the breaks in your hiring process and, more importantly, what you can do to fix it. If hiring has ever felt harder than you think that it should, then you're not alone. Whether that is getting the right candidates in front of you to begin with or offers falling through, whether you're dealing with early turnover, we've all seen how frustrating the process can be. So our goal today is to really make this webinar practical, and we're going to focus on real actionable insights that you can take back to your workplace and use. This session is designed for business owners, for leaders, for hiring managers, HR professionals, really anyone involved in the hiring process. We're going to walk through the 5 stages of hiring and where things tend to break down in each stage and what you can do to improve it. And of course, as Denise said, we'll leave time at the end for question and answers. So if questions come up throughout the webinar, feel free to drop them in the chat. So before we jump into the content, let's start with a quick poll. Which describes your recruiting challenge? Spending money but not finding the right candidate. Hiring takes longer than it should. Hiring managers interview too many candidates before deciding. Candidates drop out or disengage mid-process. Or new hires don't meet expectations.
Melissa, I'm going to end the poll and then we'll share the results with everybody. It
So,
looks sort of across the board. People have issues in different areas. So it looks like it's sort of split the first three, and then the number one was new hires don't meet expectations. I don't know what you're seeing on your screen, but this has the responses.
yeah, I'm seeing that too. Awesome. Okay, good to know where everyone stands. We're going to touch on a lot of these or all of these in throughout our webinar today. So I thought it would be helpful if we started where most people think their recruiting problem is. And what I tend to see is when hiring feels hard, the default explanation is that it's a people problem. It's either the lazy workforce, the picky hiring manager, a candidate's ghosting, it's a generational issue. People just don't want to work, right? But the truth is, most hiring problems are actually not people problems, they're process problems. And when your hiring feels slow or inconsistent or frustrating, it's usually because there's gaps or breakdowns in how the recruitment process is designed. And so our goal today is to help you recognize the symptoms of that broken hiring process. The good thing is, though, that if it's a process issue, it's actually within your control to fix. So as we go through this, my hope is that you become less concerned about the people or less focused on the people problems and more focused on identifying where your process might be breaking down. So let's start by breaking down the process into stages. So we're going to talk about these stages in more detail in the upcoming slides. So this is just going to be really high level. The first stage is role definition, and this is where we get really clear on what we actually need out of our new hire in this position that's open. Then it's attracting and sourcing, which is how you bring the right candidates in. And then next is screening and interviewing. This is how you evaluate candidates. Decision and offer, how you choose and close candidates. And then finally, onboarding, which I think is one that's overlooked in the recruitment process. And this is how you set new hires up for success. The important thing is that we understand these stages, they don't operate in isolation. If something is off in an early stage, it usually shows up later as poor candidate quality or messy interviews or bad hires. So, for example, if I'm not attracting and sourcing candidates optimally, then my screening calls are going to be messy because I'm not attracting the people with the experience that I need. So I might think that there aren't qualified candidates when in fact I can optimize my attracting and sourcing stage. So as we go through each stage, I want you to think about where your breakdowns might be happening upstream that are impacting the challenges that you're actually experiencing. So let's start with role definition. This is where a lot of the hiring issues begin. And on paper, it sounds simple, like we've got a job description and we know what we need, right? But then what we see is that the interviews start, and suddenly we hear things from people involved in that interview process, like, I thought this person was going to handle this, and someone else thought they were going to handle that. And what that really tells us is that there really wasn't very much clarity to begin with. And this leads to inconsistent interviews because everyone's asking different questions, they're assessing different skills without any sort of consistency. It leads to mixed signals for candidates because they're not really even sure what the job is. And then ultimately, it leads to hires that don't meet your expectations because, well, the expectations weren't clearly defined in the first place. So, for example, let's talk about a sales support role to maybe give this a more practical example here. So let's say we have a sales support role, and one person is thinking that the role is going to be building the front end of the pipeline. So that means they're going to be researching leads, identifying potential clients, doing outreach, and setting up opportunities for the sales team. So their interview is going to be focused on things like initiative, research skills, and communication. But then the other person involved in the interview is thinking that the role is about supporting deals that are already in progress, right? Managing CRM updates, preparing proposals, coordinating with clients, and just keeping things moving throughout the pipeline. Both sales support, but two totally different roles. Um, their their interview is going to be focused on organization, attention to detail, and follow through. So they're assessing totally different skill sets. And the candidate's probably sitting there wondering, well, what exactly am I going to be doing when I come into this role? And this breakdown is exactly what I was mentioned earlier, which is, the breakdown doesn't, that in the role definition doesn't just stay here, it carries throughout the entire process. So how do we fix this? Well, it starts with getting aligned before you even start advertising the opening, and certainly before you ever have a conversation with a candidate. And there's a couple of ways to do that, like job description or like a success profile. But the tool that you use itself isn't the point. The point is that there's clarity and alignment to begin with. At Ethos, we use something called the success profile because it forces that alignment conversation. Our success profile answers questions like, what does this person need to accomplish? What do the first 30, 60, 90 days, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year look like? And what will they accomplish in those time frames? What are they actually accountable for? What are the behavioral traits that are necessary for this role? What skills are absolutely necessary versus negotiable or we're willing to train on the job? And how will this person contribute to moving the needle forward? So instead of just listing tasks, which you typically see in a job description, we're defining success in a very measurable way. And that clarity gets everyone on the same page pretty quickly. Whereas job descriptions, they do still play a very important role, but this is where things often go a little wonky. A bad job description is vague, it's overly long, and it reads like a generic list of responsibilities and requirements. I worked with a company once that sent me their job descriptions to review, and almost every single job description was 6 to 8 pages. That's pretty excessive. You get lost in a document like that, and how do we know what the job really is, right? It doesn't really tell us what the job actually is, and it certainly doesn't create clarity for the hiring team. Um, so a good job description, excuse me, is going to help the candidates understand how their skills are going to be used, what they're responsible for, and what they're walking into. It's really focused and it's relevant and it connects to the real expectation of the work environment. And so whatever you're using, whether that's a success profile, whether that's a job description, the goal is always going to be the same in this stage, is to get really clear on what success looks like, what this person is going to be doing before you start the hiring process. Um, Role definition is the cornerstone upon which all other stages of the recruitment process are built. So it's really important to get that one right. I'm going to pass it over to Linda to talk to us about traction and sourcing.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Hi, everybody. So the second stage in the process is attracting and sourcing. So now you've defined the role, you have organizational clarity, hopefully, and alignment on what the new hire is going to do to be successful, because that's a big thing that we really try to emphasize with clients. It's not about the haves, it's about the do. And so what are they going to do to be successful? You've got that. And so now you're going to go out and you're going to try to attract some candidates. So keep in mind that your role really is shifting to more of a sales and marketing role now, right? You're going out there, you're trying to say, hey, come to us. And there's a variety of ways to do it, but some of the problems that we see that might be occurring are mostly related to some of the things you see on the screen here. And starting with using a job description as a job posting, that's just something to me. It's a lot of companies do it. I just don't think it's a best practice. And I'll give you an example of what I mean in just a second. Um, while a lot of companies do it, like I said, not a best practice. So hopefully we can convince you to just make some slight changes there. Um, you may also have problems relating to relying on one source, like a lot of companies these days use Indeed. Nothing wrong with that, except you're really sort of praying and, posting and praying and hoping they're going to come to you, as opposed to going out and figuring out, how am I going to attract candidates to come to me? And if you're just posting a list of all of the qualifications, because that makes it easier on you to screen people, hoping to scare off people that aren't qualified, right? It's really not attracting anybody. You're going to end up with people that are probably unemployed, need to find a job someplace, right? So they're just looking for that. And another issue is maybe just not even using some very inexpensive, obvious recruiting sources, like, an employee referral program, or putting a career page on your company website. If you're out there and you're using social media, I would really encourage your marketing people to every once in a while make a post about job opportunities at the company, even if it's just generic, right? But they can also be more specific and talk about how great it is to work for your organization and come look at these jobs and give a link to the career page. It's a really sort of inexpensive way to just always have a pipeline there. So I mentioned a second ago, like, try to stay away from posting the job description. So instead of a job, a JD that's going to say, you have to have 5 years of customer service experience and you're going to answer, over 100 customer calls a day, what is great about that to the candidate? What's going to attract them? So maybe say something like, hey, use that 5 years of customer service experience to make raving fans, right? By offering tips to photographers on how to improve their pictures. I have a friend that works in customer service for a company, and that's one of the things that she does, right? She's answering some logistics questions about how the website works and things like that. But she's also, reinforcing to the photographer how great their pictures are, and, giving them tips on things that they can do. Second example is, instead of just relying on the, hey, you've got to have so many years of engineering experience, tell them what they're going to be able to do with that experience. Like, what's in it for them? How is it going to be attractive to them? A lot of engineers would be super excited to work on like a new project, a new prototype, to learn something, to be able to create something, right? If that's something they're going to be able to do, then I would put that out there in the ad to tell them they're going to be able to work on this first ever, whatever prototype, because that is going to be exciting to them, and it'll also help them in their career long term. We also mentioned that just relying on one job, job place or job posting, right? There's one place to post and go to look, where there's so many different ways and places that you can find talent. So don't just rely on one, right? So again, I mentioned the referral bonus program, driving candidates to your company career page. So the other thing is, figure out where the talent you want actually sort of hangs out, right? So a perfect example of this, I'm going to give kudos to Melissa. She was doing a retained search to find an operations manager for a collision repair shop. Okay, sort of random for us, right? Not as corporate as most of our clients are. So, it's not like she didn't post an ad and try to attract candidates that way. But in addition to that, she actually went out and thought to herself, okay, where are these candidates most likely to hang out? And she went to car shows, right? Like, whoo, like mind blowing, right? And that's what makes her a great recruiter is she thought about it and said, oh, you know what? These people are into cars. Let's go find somebody that's passionate about cars. They're going to hang out at car shows. That's where she ended up finding the candidate that the company ended up hiring. Another example would be from long ago in my past, think outside the box. We were trying to hire some part-time, mostly second shift workers to work on this. Again, goes back to what's exciting it for them. We had a contract to make some ceramic tiles for the Sikorsky helicopter, right? This was back in the day where the Testa Marine Corps helicopter base, where those blimp hangars are, was still active as a Marine Corps base. And we went over and we said, hey, is there a place that we can like post a flyer back in the day? And they said, yeah, sure. We have these bulletin boards around. So we put it up there and we had just a ton of people from the base come over, both Marines, but also spouses coming over and saying, yeah, I would love to be able to make some more money. And this is perfect for us, right? So just think outside the box and figure out where is that talent going to be hanging out. So that's sort of the difference between the posting and praying and actively sourcing candidates. Go to them, figure out where it's going to be. All along as we go through this, we're also going to share some metrics with you and talk to you about breaking down the process, as Melissa said, and trying to figure out sort of like where's the process broken. So key metric you can use to see how effective your recruiting sources are is what we call sourcing effectiveness. So which posting in this case do you think is more effective? I want you to drop in the chat whether you think Indeed or LinkedIn is more effective based on these statistics. For, in both cases, 2 people were hired. Indeed, you got 50 candidates, so you got 5 times more than LinkedIn, right? But you ended up with 2 in both cases. Drop in the chat what you think. Is it Indeed or is it LinkedIn? I don't see anybody dropping anything in the chat, but all right. Well, I'll just tell you my opinion on this. And that is I would argue that LinkedIn is 5 times more effective than Indeed. Now, this is something that you got to think about also. You can post on a variety of, I'm like forgetting the word today, but platforms, I guess, a variety of recruiting platforms. But how much work is it? In this case, you had to sort through 50 candidates, right, to get your 2 hires. So I could argue that that's a 4% effective rate. Whereas in LinkedIn, you may have only gotten 10 candidates, but those were higher quality. You still ended up with your 2, but it took you less effort. Right? That's just one argument you could make. You could also argue, well, we got 2 out of both, and then that's fine as well. But those are the type of things you should be thinking about is, if you get 200, you post it on Craigslist, which I don't know if anybody does that anymore, but post on Craigslist and get 500 candidates. But if you're not hiring any of them or you're ending up with one of them, then I would argue that that's probably not your most effective resource and you should look for something else. All right. And I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa.
Awesome. Thank you. So screening and interviewing. This is where things start to feel a little messy. Um, I've heard from client after client, they're in the interview process and they're not quite sure if they want to extend an offer, so they decide to have someone else meet with that candidate. And the common thought is the more interviews we do, the better our decision will be because more eyes on the candidate. But typically more interviews, they don't usually create more clarity. They usually just create more confusion. 3 touch points is the gold standard for interviews. So screening call, an interview, and a second interview, or a screening call, a skills test, and an interview. That's the gold standard. I think where the breakdown happens with the more interviews is that if you don't have alignment going into your interview, then every additional interview brings in a different opinion and a different perspective, and a different definition of what good looks like. And if every interviewer is asking something different, then you're not really comparing candidates, you're just comparing conversations. And this really goes back to that alignment on what we're expecting out of this role, what good looks like. When we don't do that, and it leads to slower decision making, losing candidates in the middle of the process. People don't wait for your interview process to be complete before accepting jobs. So it's often when we have a, an interview process that has so many interviews, you end up losing people in there just through other companies that are faster. Ultimately, you get hires that don't match your actual needs because the need was never clearly defined in the first place. Another big issue we see at this stage is ignoring transferable skills. It's more often than not that candidates are going to not come to you from the exact same industry or background, but that doesn't mean that they can't do the job. So if your process is too rigid, you end up overlooking people that actually have the capability to succeed. And then on top of that, if your interviews aren't structured, you get inconsistent questions, inconsistent evaluation, and decisions that are based more on opinion, than anything that's actually grounded. So, again, just goes to show this isn't necessarily a people problem at this stage. It really is a process problem that's showing up in a different stage. That lack of clarity of what we actually need this person to do. So how do we fix this in the screening and interviewing stage? Well, it really does come down to having a structured interview. At this point, I'm assuming that we are all aligned on what we will need this person to accomplish. So if we're having too many interviews at this stage and we're all aligned, it comes down to structure. When you structure your interviews, the interview questions are tied to the role requirements. And so you're not just asking random questions, you're actually evaluating candidates against what really matters for success in the role. And then second, creating an interview process that has consistent questions across the candidates. This is a structured interview. I love structured interviews. I love, questions that are shared across all of the candidates. You're comparing apples to apples. You can easily see across multiple candidates someone's weak point and someone's strong point. If every candidate is getting a completely different experience, you're not really making a fair and accurate comparison. And then the third thing we can do is develop clear criteria before the interviews even start. You can see in the slide, there's an example of the way that I structure my interview questions, which you have a grading rubric already defined before you even meet with the candidate of 1, 3, and 5. It's a poor response, a good response, an excellent response. And after every candidate answers their question, I'm scoring their response. I'm still taking notes so that I can reference back to them. But here we can easily see, okay, if I have a role that effective communication is extremely important, can't train that on the job, not willing to, it's an absolute requirement. I know that I'm going to be looking for at least a 3 or greater in this area, and everyone's going to be assessed on that same competency. And then finally, use a mix of interview techniques. Just because just because we're using a structured interview doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be robotic. But using different techniques like behavioral questions, situational questions, or even skills assessments when appropriate, can be really helpful because just asking questions and getting an answer and moving on, that's usually not enough to really truly evaluate someone. So you have to dig a little bit deeper. Um, and I'll share some of these interview techniques with you guys. Skills test is one that I like to implement. This directly measures a candidate's ability to perform certain job-related tasks. So you have like Excel assessments or even like a language assessment if you're hiring someone who needs to be bilingual, speak a certain language. There's skills assessments for that, or like customer service. They even get even more technical, like estimating. I've seen like construction management. It just really depends. And there's different platforms offer different assessments. You can find them through Indeed assessments. They offer some. Tuscarilla is another one. Criteria Corp. Or you can go through Ethos. We have access to over 1,000 assessments for pretty much anything that you're looking for. Another technique is behavioral interviewing. So this is where you ask candidates to share their experience with a certain area of the role that they would be experiencing. These usually start with, tell me about a time when. And we ask questions like this because they focus on past behavior. And we know that past behavior is the best predictor that we have of future performance. Um, and yeah, the next one is situational interviewing. These are hypothetical scenarios. I really like these when a candidate doesn't come from the exact environment or background that the role is that I'm hiring for. You want to see if they have transferable skills, or if they can think on their feet. So these, again, are hypothetical situations. You're testing their judgment, their decision making. An example of this might be, what would you do if a client escalated an issue and you couldn't solve it? Right? You're just testing them on their feet and seeing how they think. The next one is a simulation interview. These are real world job scenarios. They have a really high predictive value when they're done right. You see these like in sales or something where they say, "Sell me this pen," right? That would be a simulation, or even respond to me as if I'm an angry customer and kind of role play. The next one is cultural alignment, which is not a cultural fit interview. I think this is where a lot of companies go sideways, is we feel like we need to, or they feel like they might need to find a candidate that fits exactly the mold of what they're looking for. And when we're have cultural alignment interviews, we're really trying to find people who align with our values. Um, Let's just say, I'll give you an example because I think it's a little bit easier. Let's just say that we have a really highly independent company, right? We have a company where our employees work very independently. And because of that, you need a high level of accountability, right? You could ask a question, something like, what kind of work environment helps you do your best work, right? Kind of keep it open-ended and let them tell you. And if it's a good fit, it's a good fit. But that's all around the value of being accountable. Rather than, we all like to play golf, or, we all like the Ducks or whatever it may be. And then the next one is a panel interview. And everyone, I'm sure, is familiar with panel interviews. They can be extremely time efficient. They give a chance for multiple perspectives to exist in real time. The only thing I'll say about panel interviews is I really suggest that everyone form their opinion independently. When you're using a structured interview and grading rubric, grade your responses independently and then come together. Otherwise, what you end up is with everyone just agreeing with each other, even if that wasn't really their own opinion to begin with. And then the next one I really like using as well is a PXT Select assessment. It's a predictive hiring tool. It's a Wiley product. And this is something that we use with all of our retained searches. So this is using objective data to support hiring decisions. It's really best used alongside interviews, not as a standalone decision maker, even though it says predictive hiring tool. And what it does essentially is that you have a list of performance models and certain scores that fall within that performance model of where someone, it's like the best predictor of success if they fall within that model. And it measures candidates on their cognitive abilities, like their thinking style, linguistically and mathematically, can they do the job? Their behavior traits, which is really interesting. So it measures things like how assertive someone is, how willing they are to question the status quo, how sociable they are, right? And those performance models will change um, based off of the role, right? A recruiter probably needs to be a lot more sociable than, let's just say, like a software engineer. Um, it's a tool that can add consistency and reduce bias in evaluation. So let's talk about how you know if this part of your process is actually working. So this would be the metrics for this stage. Because really without data, you're just guessing. And there's few simple metrics that can tell you quite a bit. The first one is going to be your interview to hire ratio. And that was something that Linda mentioned on her slide. So how many candidates are you interviewing to make one hire? I think hers was how many candidates, how many applicants are you getting to make that one hire? This is how many candidates are you interviewing. If that number is really high, it usually means one of two things. Either you're not getting the right candidates in, or you're not clear on what you're looking for, right? And if you're not clear on what you're looking for, possibly you're not screening accurately. And so more candidates are getting through that process. And then the next is time spent in the interview stage. So how long are your candidates sitting in your process? Because like I said, if your process drags out, your candidates aren't waiting. They take other offers. Everyone needs to work. And then there's looking at no-shows for interviews. So this can be a signal of engagement. So are candidates really interested and bought into your process? This can tell you a lot about your screening call. Your screening call is a wonderful opportunity to really your only opportunity to sell candidates on what you have to offer. They are assessing you just as much as you're assessing them. So you really need to not rely just on your job ad or their desperation to work. We really need to uh, make people feel like they're going to be motivated in the workplace and enjoy working at your company. And we don't do that necessarily by, or we don't do that by skewing what it is that we offer. We do that by having conversations to see if our values align with each other. Can't attract everyone. You're not everyone's cup of tea, and that's totally okay. You're not looking for everyone. You're just looking for those select people that are going to fit into your work environment. And then finally, we look at, no, that's it, right? We just talked about drop-off rate. Um, did we? Oh my goodness. Drop-off rate. Where are you losing
We did.
people? We did, yeah? Okay, thank you. Went on a little tangent there. And then the one thing, I remind you again is that you treat your candidates like your customers. They're evaluating you just as much as you're evaluating them. So the way that you design this process and the way you move them through your process matters, right? The follow-up communication that you have with them matters. The length of time between your interview and your letting them know that they're moved on to the next stage matters. So just, keep that in mind as you're designing your process. So I'll turn it over to Linda to talk about the decision and offer stage.
Thanks, Melissa. So sometimes you get all the way through the interview stage and then you run into trouble, right? So one person, as Melissa mentioned, says, I thought this new hire was going to do this. And someone else says, I thought they were going to do that. So all of this should have been decided up front when you develop that success profile or even your job description, whatever it is you're going to do. But when you initially decide, okay, we're going to hire somebody, take the time to get clarity, because if you don't get that clarity up front, now when you come time to make the decision on who to make an offer to, you're going to run into problems there. Another thing that we see from time to time is people hiring like, meaning like themselves, right? I'm not here to preach about diversity, but I'll just say the best decisions and best teams are going to be made up of people who aren't all alike, right? So, like on the ethos team, we use the DISC profile a lot, but if you looked at how, if you mapped our entire team, we're all over the place. And that's what I think makes us a really good team. So you want to make sure that people are challenging themselves and each other on any sort of hidden bias they may have, that they're not, screening out people that aren't like them. So just keep people focused on that success profile and what the person must do to be successful in the role. And then that kind of noise will go away. So the last two are a little bit different. I'm going to talk about them in a little bit more detail, and that's candidates not accepting the offer or taking your offer, but then when they go back and give notice, they're accepting a counter offer from their prior, or their still current company at that point. So one of the things that you can do is always pre-close the offer. And by that, what I mean is first of all, during the interviews, you should be finding out what's most important to the candidate. Like for me, it's not like I didn't want to make a certain amount of money when I was looking for jobs, but also time off was really important to me. Somebody else may say, I need a flexible working schedule, or, something like that, or they want to work 1 day a week from home, or they want to know what exciting projects they're going to be able to work on. Whatever it is, find out what's most important to them. You're not going to be able to bend on some of those things. If somebody, says, I want to make $1 million a year, that's probably going to be cost prohibitive, right? Or if they say, I want to be able to take off, a month every year, you may say, no, that's not what I'm willing to do, but I am willing to do this for you, right? So just think about what it is. A lot of times clients will say to us, well, if I do it for one, I have to do it for everybody. And that's not the case. You just can't do it based on discriminatory reasons, right? You can't say, I'm going to give all of the men, 3 weeks vacation and the women only 2 weeks vacation or things like that. But you can make exceptions to some policies. Another one that comes up a lot is, if somebody leaves a company and they had insurance, they may not start on your insurance plan, for, first of the month after 60 days or something. Well, they can't go without insurance. Cobra's expensive. You could offer to pay for their Cobra as part of their offer, right? A couple months for a few $100s for you may make the difference in them taking your offer, not taking your offer, right? So always pre-close the offer. So you found out what's most important to them. You're going to say to them, before you ever put this in writing, hey, Melissa, if I were to offer you this much money per year, would you want to accept the offer? Right? Test it. See what she says. If she goes, oh, yeah, absolutely, then you can say, great, then I'm going to go ahead and put this in writing. You'll have it by the end of the day. Always put a time limit on how long they have to accept the offer, so they don't just like keep accepting other offers or wait to see what the next best offer is. Give them 3 days, maybe 5, and say, okay, this offer expires by then. But just do the test, sort of like the float the test balloon, right? Would you want to accept the offer, see what they say, then put it in writing? The another question you might want to ask them, if we were to offer you, Melissa, this much money, what are you going to do if your current employer matches or surpasses it, right? I've got a friend who's an audit partner at a CPA firm going through this right now. It's hard to find good audit people or accountant people at all. But in her case, she's been interviewing and sort of courting this guy for a number of months. His plan was to give notice today, as a matter of fact, after the April 15th deadline passed. She's holding her breath to see. And he was really honest with her. And when she asked that second question, what are you going to do if your current company matches it? In this case, it's an opportunity to become a partner, which he does not currently have at his job. He said, I'll probably take it. He's been there 16 years. And so at least she knows where she stands. So, she's holding her breath, hoping that he doesn't change his mind. But that's one of the things that you can do to sort of test that, to see how the candidate responds before you ever put it in writing. But if it looks like, okay, this is good, then go ahead and put it, on paper. The other thing to do, and this is something that my friend Cindy's doing also, is tether them to the company as much as possible. Continue to reach out. They've continued to have dinners, right? They continue to talk every couple of weeks. In the 2 months she's been waiting to find out what's going to happen. You can also send swag. And I love this picture, courtesy of ChatGPT. But I told them, like, one of the things that we used to do is, I was working at a high-tech company and we had different parts that were, good size to make cookies from. We went to a cookie company down the street and we said, hey, can you make cookies that look like our products? And they said, sure. Can you use these colors? Sure. So they made cookie baskets. And so whenever we had a new hire, we would send a cookie basket that looked like our parts to the person's home. So what did that do? Not only did it get the candidate excited, but now families excited as well, right? Kids are excited, spouses excited. Everybody's like, wow, how cool is this company that this is what they did, right? It doesn't work 100% of the time, but I will say, we use this a lot when we were fighting with other, competition to bring in the best software engineers, and we were pretty successful in doing it. And I think this is just one other way you can do it, to let them know you care, let them know you're thinking about them. You really want them to join the team, right? I can't even remember a single candidate, getting the cookies and then changing their mind. It might have happened, but we were pretty successful at this. So if you have swag, send it out to them. You can always have hiring managers reach out to them. You can have, new buddies, introduce them to somebody else on the team, to buddy up with them and sort of welcome them to the company. So some of the metrics you want to take a look at on decision and offer is what's your offer acceptance rate? And that's really what I was just describing to you. It's just what it sounds like, right? What percentage of offers that you make are accepted? If it's low, then take a look at why candidates are turning you down. Is it the money? Is it the benefits? Is it time off? What is it? Cost per hire, take a look at how much it's costing you to find your talent. As a really simple measure, you can calculate easily the hard costs, right? What did that job posting cost? For Indeed and others that have like an annual plan, just figure out what it is as an estimate, break it down as best you can. So those are the hard costs. If you want to get a little bit more complex with it, then also factor in things like time. If you're having 20 different people interview a candidate, that is a lot of expense hidden because it doesn't show up on a line item any place, but it's something you need to factor in. Is there a better way to do it? And then time to fill, this is a measure of how long it takes from the time you get that open requisition to the time that person starts, right? What is that time? It's going to vary by position. Some are a lot easier to fill than others, but it's something that you should take into consideration and see if there's a way to break down that process and make it even faster. And I've got a real world example to give you to sort of explain what I mean by this. So this is actually from a company where I used to work a long time ago. It was a marketing company. And I was brought in to recruit and train their outside sales presenters. So they use sort of like a Tony Robbins model where they would have people go into residential real estate offices and deliver a scripted 45-minute presentation and then sell them tickets to an event, like a 3 or 4 day, sort of workshop. So what the process was when we were recruiting, because we would recruit nationwide, like wherever we were going to try to be, have our conference, that's where we were like really targeting primarily to have the sales presenters go. So these are numbers, 240 resumes received. That's good. That's a lot, right? From a variety of resources that we use. So I would usually choose about 10% to phone screen. So in this case, 25. I would phone screen them, probably spend a half an hour with them, figure out if on the surface it looks like this is a person that can do the job. We'd pass them along to the manager. The manager would like most of them because, I could phone screen pretty well. So they would maybe take 10 out of 12. And at that point in our process, we were flying them out to California for a couple of days so they could deliver their presentation in person and we can decide from that who we wanted to offer. Because if they didn't have the presentation skills, they were not going to succeed in this job. So in this case, we started with 240, we ended up with 2 people hired, but in that one step, we were spending a lot of money, right? On average, it would be about $3,500 between plane fare and then hotels, all of that kind of stuff. So we broke that down and we said, okay, where are we having the biggest drop off? And the biggest drop off was at that stage, right? We're flying out 10, but we're only making 2 offers. So that's a pretty low rate. So what we did is we actually inserted a new line item. And that was our new step in the process, which is instead of flying them out first, we said, hey, we want you to record yourself doing the 5-minute introduction section of this and send it to us. And then we would watch that video. And I have to say, this was 20 years ago. So this was actually before people had iPhones and they could just do it really easily. So I was worried that people were not going to do it, but everybody for the most part would do it. So if we said to 12 people like, hey, let's do this, most of them would end up doing this. So in this case, what would happen though, is you can see that we would say, okay, 9 of you, please send us the videos. 9 people would do this. And then we would only fly 3 out to California, right? And that was a big drop off because we could see from the video, this is not going to work for them. And so that way we were saving like almost $25,000 every time we would make one of these hires because we had that new step in the process. So sometimes it's not, taking a step out of the process. It could be putting a step into the process that actually improves the effectiveness of that recruiting process. And then in the end, we were still hiring that 2 people, but again, we were saving a ton of money doing this. So Melissa, I'm back to you to talk about onboarding.
Awesome. I always love hearing that example. So the last piece is onboarding. This is where things tend to quietly fall apart. Because, as I said before, recruitment doesn't end when the offer is accepted. But onboarding is often treated as an afterthought, and there's no real plan, things aren't prepared, and day one ends up feeling chaotic for everyone. And the new hire shows up, and it's like, we're so excited that you're here. Just give us a second to figure things out. And it leads to exactly what you would expect it to lead to. The new hire feels overwhelmed or unsure right out of the gate. And it takes longer for them to get up to speed, and to get comfortable knowing exactly what they're supposed to be doing, where they're supposed to be. And in some cases, you lose some of those new hires early. You can have a really dysfunctional first week for a new hire, and after that first couple of days, they're looking for a new job already. And a lot of times you can't recover from that. And they're already going on other interviews and talking to other companies that seem more organized, at least on the surface. It's hard to recover from. So, especially, and that's a tough outcome, especially with all of the time and the effort that went into hiring them in the first place. And so, just like every other process that we've talked about today, if there's no structure here, then the process breaks down. So, how do we fix onboarding? It really just comes down to being intentional and structured. The first is creating a structured onboarding plan. It's not something that you figure out as you go. You can adjust as you go, but it should really be mapped out ahead of time. The second is having clear ownership and who's responsible for the training and when. I know when I first started with Ethos, it was a meeting with every person of the team. They were each going to show me a different thing, and I had a certain day that I was meeting with them on. It was all virtually, but I knew exactly what I was supposed to be doing and who I was talking to. And it definitely set a tone in my mind. The third is mapping out, at least for the first couple of weeks, what the training is supposed to be looking at, so they know what to expect. And then finally, day one readiness. It's so important to have things like tools and their access to software programs and logins ready, workspace ready, just everything that they might need ready before they walk in. Keys, badge, whatever it may be, because those details matter more than people tend to think. I'll give you a quick example. I used to work with a company where the onboarding was actually just really inconsistent, and it had a lot of the problems that I've already identified. So the new hires would come in, they would meet with HR quickly to be handed a packet of paper, and then we're set to go fill out those papers on their own, without much guidance. And then once they came back and they handed in their paperwork, they were handed a manual to go back to that room and sit and read. Most of the time, their logins weren't ready. Sometimes they were, but for the most part, they weren't ready. And then their training with their manager wouldn't really even start until day two or three. So they spent a ton of time just sitting in that room, trying to figure things out on their own, reading the manuals, trying to envision what their job looks like in reality. And so the first thing that we did was map out the training goals. We did goals 1 through 3, what we wanted them to know and be able to do by the end of that third week. And then we made sure the next thing we did was to make sure that everything was ready to go by the time they started. So the way that I did this was designated a new hire day that was going to be on Tuesdays. Every week on Tuesdays is when new hires started, and that meant on Monday afternoon, I was getting all the logins ready and making sure everyone was set up and ready to go. That part of the onboarding was pretty simple to figure out. It was just about putting, some order in place and really things that I could do proactively. The real challenge was the manager's availability, because the manager was the one that was going to be training this individual. And new hires, they need a ton of support early on. And the manager just didn't have that capacity. So what we did was we sat down, we reassigned parts of the training to other team members that were able to do that. And we made sure that there was dedicated time blocked for support with the people that were training them and with their manager. They needed a substantially less amount of time from their manager, so it was easier for everyone. And then once everything was in place, everything really changed. The new hires felt more confident, ramped up faster. Um, I think Linda's getting us back on track. They're ramped up faster and they actually knew what they were supposed to be doing. So, it's not necessarily about doing more. There wasn't anything extra that we did in those steps. It was just more about being proactive and reassigning, right? It's not like we took these new hires out to lunch, or coffee or anything like that, which is a really nice touch, but it wasn't like we added anything. We just restructured it so that there was more intention behind what we were doing. And then, just like the earlier stages that we talked about, onboarding should be measured because if you're not tracking it, you really don't know if it's working. So there's a couple things that you can look at for your onboarding, which is retention in the first 90 days. That's usually when you'll see the drop off. So, are your new hires staying past those first couple of months? If not, it's not usually a hiring issue. It can often be an onboarding issue. The next is time to productivity, and this is a big one. So this is how long it'll take for someone to actually contribute in their role, right? In that example that I just gave you, it was by the end of the third week, we're expecting they're coming into their fourth week and they can do a lot of the job independently. A strong onboarding process should shorten that timeline. So you can assess what it is now and see what it is after you make some changes and then adjust from there. And then the last one is just early performance feedback, the conversations that you're having with this new hire. What are you hearing from them in those first few weeks? Are they sharing that they are struggling or they're unsure about something? Then we should adjust what the next week looks like or the next couple of days in their onboarding or training plan. Or are they saying that they feel comfortable and confident and you can see that they're progressing through what it is that they need to know? Those early conversations, however they go, are going to tell you a lot about how effective your onboarding is. And all of this is within your control. So if you build the structured onboarding and you pay attention to those metrics, and you're actually setting up your new hires that you spent a lot of time and money invested into them. You actually help them set them up to succeed. Um, Awesome. So before we get into any questions, we're going to share with you a few exciting things that we have coming up. The first one's on screen here. We have the Strategic Hiring Advisory Group, aka the SHAG. This is starting in May. We're going to be rolling out a virtual monthly group. And the idea here is to create a space where all hiring leaders can meet regularly to discuss real hiring challenges, where we can share experiences with each other and your peers, refine your hiring approach over time, with the goal to make more confident hiring decisions. We do meet once a month for 1 hour over Zoom. And it starts with discussing a recruitment hot topic. Usually, topic will come from the members themselves. And then we'll actually just answer your questions in real time to help you solve your recruiting challenges. So that starts on May 13th. It's $4.95 for 6 months, $8.95 for a year. We're so confident that you're going to get something out of it that if you come to the first session and you don't, we'll give you your money back. All right, the next one that we have available for you guys, which is exciting, is the Strategic Hiring Playbook. This is an e-course. It's a 4-module self-paced course designed to help individuals build stronger hiring processes from the ground up. So inside the program, we walk through how to define success profiles and structure interviews and all that good stuff. It also includes, and this is really exciting, it includes like over 30 practical templates and worksheets and cheat sheets that you can use immediately. So things like interview frameworks, evaluation tools, hiring process guides. So it's just not theory, it's actually giving you tools that you can use inside your hiring process right away. And that's $4.95 one-time cost. I'm going to turn it over to Linda.
Thanks, Melissa. And sorry, I was having some technical difficulties. I kept jumping out of presentation mode. I'm not sure why. Um, so again, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat now. I know we're coming up on the end of the hour if we're not already there. Here's just a slide about our services. A lot of people don't know. We do recruiting, we do payroll, we do, training development work, our general consulting, we do audits, and also the assessments, some of which Melissa already pointed to. Our contact information is there. You can also follow us on Instagram at EthosHCSMagic. And if you sign up or subscribe on our YouTube channel, then you'll be notified every time a new video is posted. So if in the future you can't make a webinar, it'll tell you when we've posted something. Denise, do we have any questions?
Yes, and I'm going to bring up one thing that you did mention earlier, Linda. It was interesting that you talked about posting on social. So many people forget that you look at a company's social to understand the inner workings and the culture of the company. And that is a huge opportunity for you to get people who are interested in what you do and understand how your company works. So I think that's sometimes overlooked. All right, so we have a couple questions. If people have to drop off, we're going to keep the recording going for just a few questions and it will be posted tomorrow. Um, we got a question. I have a position that I hire for often, and it usually takes me a long time to fill it because so many of the applicants that I get are not qualified. Do you have any suggestions for me?
I'll go ahead and take that
Yeah.
one. So, yeah, a couple things come to mind. So, a ton of applicants, not really qualified. The first one that I always pivot to is, are we absolutely clear on that role definition? Do we know exactly what it is that's a requirement versus something that we're okay teaching on the job? If we are extremely clear on that and our interview process and our screening process is set up that's in alignment with that role definition, then the next stage I go to is the attraction and sourcing. Like, are we attracting the right candidates? Because we might be looking somewhere where our candidates are not. And if, that is my next place to go to is, and the way that the job ad is written, something that Linda touched on, like how compelling is your job ad, and does it speak to the things that are important to that particular population that would be applying for this job? Because we all have to work, right? We all need money to exist. But most people, they want to feel like they're accomplishing something in their job. They want to feel like they are going to be supported in the next stage of their development. They want to feel like they're contributing to something. And so, how does your job ad speak to that? So, where you're posting, where you're looking for your candidates, and how the methods that you're using to attract. Linda, you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you're right on the money there. It goes back to role definition and then looking at, where do these peeps hang out, right? Like if you're, again, going back to the example of Melissa going to car shows looking for someone that wants to work at a car collision repair place, right? That's where they hang out, then that's where you should go.
Great.
Awesome.
Um, there was your conversation about onboarding, Melissa, was spot on because I have horror stories of being onboarded in companies, so we can have that conversation next time we see each other.
Oh,
But someone brought up my company sees a lot of early turnover, but I think our onboarding is organized. What are your thoughts, like how to look at this process to understand if it is organized or where the fallout could be?
yeah, I mean, looking at some of those metrics, right? I mean, if you're already bringing one of those up, so a fallout in the on the on 90 within 90 days, I'm assuming. So I guess my question is, are there conversations happening with that individual within their first couple of weeks to see how they're doing, how they're feeling, get that firsthand experience of their onboarding. And then I go back to a previous stage, which is the screening and interviewing, particularly the screening call. So a lot of drop off with a structured onboarding. It really screams to me that there's a disconnect between what this person is doing and what they thought they were going to be doing, or the environment that they're in versus the environment they thought they were joining. There's just a big disconnect there. So, I said it earlier, you're not everyone's cup of tea, and you don't want to be, right? You don't want to have to talk to 3,000 people to make one hire. We just need to really be transparent in who we are as an organization and how we are, and find the individuals that actually are in alignment with that, and be really honest about the job. Some jobs are not they're not everyone's cup of tea either, right? And there's challenging aspects to every role. Every role. I'm hiring for a role right now that's a customer service job, and it's a extremely demanding job, and I'm extremely transparent with my candidates. You know, it's not something where you're just going to be able to um, sit back and take calls and find the solutions right away. Like there's going to be, it's pretty complex. So we've got to make sure that our candidates are truly understanding the environment that they're coming into.
One last question if we have time. We got a question about what is one hiring step most organizations should eliminate or simplify? I don't know without knowing what their thing is.
Yeah,
Um,
let me jump in on this one because I
yeah.
would say I don't look at it as you need to eliminate or simplify something. I would say the most important part of any recruiting process is actually going back to that role definition, right? Making sure that you have clarity up front about what the new hire is going to be doing. That's the most important thing because everything else in the process stems from that. So I would start by really focusing on making that step in your process as effective as possible. So you have clarity on the role because from that, I mean, when we write a success profile, our clients love it because the candidate loves it. They know exactly what's going on. They love seeing a company that's, taking the time to think through what they want. So they either self-select out or they get super excited about the position. You don't have candidates going, yeah, it was a job ad and that's what I did. They're like, oh my God, get out of my head. This is exactly what I was looking for. Or they don't want to be held to a standard because the success profile has metrics built in, KPIs built in. Um, and then the new hire, I mean, the hiring manager loves it because it's their performance, plan for the next year. They've got it all laid out, right? It's easy to interview. So I would say if you're going to focus on one thing, don't think about it in terms of what can I simplify. You want to use metrics all throughout your process, but really focus on making that tight step in your process.
Okay, great. It's 12:07, so I think we have to wrap it up. So thank you everyone for attending today. We appreciate your time. If you have webinar thoughts or suggestions for topics, please make sure you reach out to Linda. She's always interested in hearing what is interesting to you.
Please. Thanks, Denise. Thanks, Melissa. Great job, ladies. Everybody have a great rest of the week.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.